Marcus Hale always opened the school at 5 in the morning. It wasn't because he loved the job that much. It's just that at 62, when life gets too quiet, you start to love the routines. They make the days feel like they're still moving. Outside Fairfield Ridge Elementary in Ohio, the sky was so dark it was like the morning hadn't decided whether to start yet. Old snow was packed in a thin layer along the parking lot. The cold wind blew through the flags in front of the school, making a sound as dry and thin as sandpaper. Marcus unlocked the side door with the heavy ring of keys hanging from his hip and stepped into the familiar dark hallway. The smell of floor wax, old book dust, and the warm breath from the ancient heating system immediately wrapped around him, just like it had every day for the past 17 years. He flipped on the lights in the east hallway first, then the cafeteria, then the library, and it was when the library lights flickered on that Marcus froze. There was a little girl sleeping behind the children's bookshelf, small, curled up, a blue coat far too big for her body. An old backpack was tucked under her head like a pillow. Her sneakers were placed neatly side by side, as if she'd been taught that if everything else in the world was chaos, at least your shoes should be neat. Marcus glanced at his watch. 5:12. He stood still for a few seconds. He wasn't exactly surprised. Public schools like this always had a few kids who showed up early because their parents worked night shifts or couldn't afford a sitter. But there's something about this scene that made his chest ache in a strange way. Maybe it was because it was so cold, or because no 8-year-old should be sleeping so soundly on a library floor like it was the most normal thing in the world. Marcus stepped closer, making a point to scuff his boots on the floor so he wouldn't startle her. She woke up almost instantly. It wasn't the slow, groggy way a kid usually wakes up. It was the jolt of someone who always sleeps with one eye open. She shot up, sitting bolt upright. "I'm sorry," Marcus frowned. The kid didn't even know who he was. "Sorry for what? I didn't mean to fall asleep here." Her voice was small but clear, no tears, no panic. Just the voice of a child who was used to having to explain her own existence. Marcus looked at the worn-out backpack. One of the straps had been stitched back on with white thread. He looked at her hands, red from the cold, then over at the library's glass doors all fogged over by the winter air. "What's your name?" "Ava." "What grade?" "Third." Marcus nodded slowly. He pulled over a nearby chair and sat down instead of looming over her like a principal about to deliver a lecture. That seemed to make Ava relax just a little. "What time did you get here?" She stared down at her shoes for a few seconds. Then she answered very quietly, "I don't know." Marcus waited. Ava pulled the sleeves of her coat down over her hands. "I come when my dad starts to get angry." Marcus Hale never thought he'd spend the last 20 years of his life mopping the hallways of a public elementary school in Ohio. When he was younger, he'd been a mechanic. Then, for nearly 15 years, he was the manager of a truck repair shop in Dayton. The work was steady. The pay was enough to live on. His marriage had been steady too, in the way people call things steady when they haven't yet realized they've started living like roommates instead of husband and wife. Then the plant closed, and then the marriage did too. It all happened more quietly than you'd think. There was no affair, no big screaming matches. Just two people sitting across from each other in a quiet kitchen one night in March, both understanding they'd run out of things to say a long time ago. Marcus moved to Fairfield Ridge 3 months later, a town quiet enough for old folks to retire in, and boring enough for young people to always be looking for a way out. He became the janitor at the local public elementary school almost by accident, a temporary job that stretched into 17 years. Now, at 62, Marcus had a small apartment above an old phone repair shop, an old Ford pickup that liked to stall in the cold, a back that ached whenever the temperature dropped, and a handheld radio he'd used for so long the antenna was held on with electrical tape. His life was so simple it sometimes felt like it was on a loop. Wake up at 4:15, brew coffee, pour it into the old scratch stainless steel thermos, drive to school, unlock the doors at 5 a.m., mop the hallway, listen to the radio, repeat, day in, day out. Marcus didn't hate that life, but he didn't really think about it anymore either. When you live alone long enough, everything eventually shifts into silent mode, not necessarily sad, just less sound than before. His son used to hate that about him. Ethan always said Marcus was the kind of man who keeps everything in his head until it turns to stone. The last time they really talked was almost 8 years ago, a short phone call, an even shorter argument. After that came a silence so long, it started to feel permanent. Marcus never told anyone about it. In truth, he didn't tell anyone much of anything. At school, the students thought he was unapproachable, partly because he rarely smiled, partly because he always looked tired, and partly because he hated talking before 7 in the morning. And kids were always talking before 7 in the morning. But the kids still liked him in their own way. Marcus fixed bicycle tires for the students free of charge. He always had Band-Aids in his shirt pocket, and every winter, he'd secretly sprinkle extra rock salt on the back pavement where the kids loved to run, even though the administration always said it was a waste of the budget. He wasn't the type to hug children or tell fairy tales. But the kids understood one thing very quickly. Marcus was the kind of person who would always show up if something went wrong. After the first morning he found Ava sleeping in the library, Marcus thought it was just a one-time thing. But the next morning, when he flicked on the library lights at 5:11, she was there again. Same corner, same backpack for a pillow, same pair of shoes placed neatly beside her feet. Ava woke up almost instantly at the sound of his keys. "Morning," Marcus said. "Morning, you're here early again." The little girl pulled her sleeves down. "Dad works nights." Marcus nodded, as if that explained everything. And maybe for anyone else, it would have. But on the 5th straight day of seeing an 8-year-old girl sitting alone in the dark library before dawn, Marcus started to feel like something was wrong. It wasn't one big obvious thing. No bruises, no tears, no made-for-TV movie signs. Just the little things. Ava always flinched when a door slammed. She never asked for anything. When Marcus offered her a hot chocolate, Ava would always ask, "Isn't this for someone else?" When he told her the cafeteria had extra sandwiches, she'd only take half of one. When another teacher said hello too loudly, her shoulders would instinctively tighten before she'd force them to relax. Tiny little things. But Marcus had been around long enough to know that sometimes the little things are the only ones that tell the truth. One Wednesday morning, he was mopping the east hallway, the crackle of an old country song playing from his radio, when he saw Ava in the library, reading by herself. The sun wasn't even up yet. The whole school was as quiet as a church. She was sitting cross-legged in a chair, completely absorbed in her book under a single pale yellow light. Marcus stopped his mop for a second. "You don't get scared being in here all alone?" Ava looked up from her book. "No, really?" She thought about it for a moment, then said, "It's a better quiet in here." Marcus didn't ask, better than what? He wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Instead, he went back to mopping the hall. The radio continued its soft static behind him. The swish of the mop across the floor, the low hum of the old heater in the walls. And in that moment, Marcus realized something that sent a chill through him, colder than the Ohio air outside. No 8-year-old should be that comfortable with silence. Marcus started noticing Ava the way you start to notice a small sound in your house. At first, it's just a flicker. Then one day, you realize you've been listening for it all week. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single big moment that made him think, something is seriously wrong. It was just the little things, the smallest things. One Monday morning, Marcus was changing a bulb in the 3rd grade hallway when he saw Ava standing by the vending machines in the cafeteria before school. She wasn't buying anything, just looking. It wasn't the way a kid normally looks at snacks. It was a calculating look. Marcus had seen that look before, on adults who had to count every penny at the gas station. He walked past, pretending not to notice. When he came back 10 minutes later, a muffin someone had left on the table was gone. Ava was still in the library, reading a book, but there were a few tiny crumbs on her sleeve. Another day, Marcus was pushing his utility cart down the hall when he saw the 3rd grade teacher raise her voice just a little at a student who'd spilled his milk. Just a little. Nobody else thought anything of it. But Ava's shoulders immediately jerked back, as if someone had just thrown something at her. She reacted before she even had time to think. Marcus stood at the end of the hall and felt that old, familiar chill crawl up his spine. That wasn't a normal kid's reaction. That was the reaction of someone who'd learned to anticipate the explosion before it happened. The more he watched, the more he saw. Ava always wore the same oversized blue coat, even when it got colder, even when the snow started to stick. That coat was clearly not warm enough for an Ohio January. The sleeves were frayed at the cuffs. The zipper was broken halfway down, but she wore it every single day. One morning, Marcus happened to see Ava take her shoes off in the library, warming her feet by the little space heater. Her socks were two different colors. One of them had a small hole in the heel. She immediately pulled her feet back when she saw him walk in. Sorry. Marcus almost asked her why she was always saying sorry, but he didn't. One thing you learn when you've been around long enough is this. Kids like Ava say so much with the things they don't say. Emily Carter showed up around the second week, 27 years old, a new teacher who just moved back from Columbus. Brown hair tied up in a high ponytail almost every day, drank her coffee so sweet Marcus felt his teeth ache just smelling it. She taught the class next to the library, so she usually came in early to prep her lessons. Emily was the kind of person who still believed she could change a student's life with enough care and colorful lesson plans. Marcus had met a lot of teachers like that. Some people manage to keep that faith. Most don't. That morning, Emily saw Marcus putting 2 chocolate milks into the mini fridge in the library. You know, we're not supposed to hand out food outside the cafeteria, right? Marcus closed the fridge door. The cafeteria had extra. Emily crossed her arms. They have extra every day? Marcus looked at her for a few seconds. He hated people who asked too many questions in the morning. What are you, the food police? Emily let out a small laugh, but she still looked at him with suspicion. I'm just saying, you have to be careful these days. Marcus knew what she was getting at. An older man, quietly taking an interest in a little girl. Society these days makes people suspicious of even simple kindness. And to be honest, sometimes Marcus couldn't blame them. It just made him sad. Emily stepped closer to the library door and lowered her voice. I'm not saying you have bad intentions, but you think I'm getting too involved. Emily was silent for a few seconds. I think sometimes kids need clear boundaries. Marcus nodded slowly. Fair enough. He wasn't angry, he just suddenly felt tired. That night, back in his apartment, Marcus ate dinner alone in front of a silent TV and thought about it for longer than he should have. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe he was interfering too much. Maybe the smartest thing to do was to just mop the halls, change the light bulbs, and leave other people's lives alone. But the next morning when he unlocked the library at 5:13 and saw Ava curled up asleep, her hands tucked into her sleeves against the cold, Marcus knew he couldn't do it. He set a chocolate milk on the table. The cafeteria had extra. Ava looked at the carton for a few seconds. Thank you. Marcus pretended to check a nearby outlet. She drank it very slowly, as if trying to make the feeling of something warm in her stomach last as long as possible. Then Ava said something that Marcus would remember for a long time. I can pay you back later. Marcus turned back to look at her. You're 8 years old. What kind of debts could you possibly have? Ava gave a tiny shrug. People don't like when you take things for free. That didn't sound like something a kid would come up with on her own. It sounded like something a child hears so many times. They start to believe it's true. Marcus sat down in the chair across from her. Listen, he said slowly, sometimes grown-ups help each other just because they want to. Ava looked at the milk carton in her hands. Most people don't. Marcus didn't answer right away, because the hard part was, he wasn't sure she was wrong. The days that followed settled into a familiar rhythm. Marcus mopped the hallways. His old radio crackled softly with country music. The Ohio air stayed biting cold, and Ava kept showing up to school too early. She never asked for anything more. Didn't ask for food. Didn't ask for money. Didn't talk about her family. She just sat in the library, as if it were the only place in town where she could finally breathe. One Friday morning, Marcus walked into the library a few minutes earlier than usual. Ava didn't see him come in. She thought she was alone. On the table was the sandwich Marcus had left for her. Ava unwrapped the paper ever so carefully. She took 2 small bites. Then, with a slow, practiced motion, she wrapped the other half back up and tucked it into her coat pocket. Marcus started waking up before his alarm clock. He realized it one Tuesday morning when he opened his eyes at 3:48 and just stared at the dark ceiling of his apartment for all 20 minutes before finally sitting up. Outside the window, fresh snow coated the roofs of the cars parked on the street. The small Ohio town was still asleep. It was so quiet Marcus could hear the faint hum of the heating pipes in the walls. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, his hands resting on his knees. His back ached more when the temperature dropped below freezing. Old age doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces. First the knees, then the sleep, then the ability to believe things can still change. Marcus poured coffee into his old stainless steel thermos and drove to the school in the pre-dawn darkness. The radio played an old country song, one he used to listen to when Ethan was little. Marcus switched it off halfway through. Some memories at a certain age start to feel like bruises. They ache at the slightest touch. He unlocked the school doors at 5:07. The hallways were dark. The air was cold and smelled of familiar floor cleaner. Marcus was just hanging his keys on the utility cart when he heard a small voice echoing from down the corridor near the library. It was Ava's voice. She was on the phone. Marcus didn't mean to eavesdrop. He was just walking past, but then he heard it. "No, Dad, I'll stay out of the way." Marcus froze. Ava's voice was so small, so calm. It wasn't the voice of a kid whining to her parent. It was the voice of someone trying to make themselves smaller. Marcus stood still, just around the corner. "Okay." A pause. "No, I already ate." Marcus looked down at the untouched sandwich in his own hand. She was lying. Another silence. Then Ava said so quietly, "I know you're tired." That sentence made Marcus feel something heavy drop in his chest. 8 years old? No 8-year-old should ever talk like that. No kid should have to learn how to soothe an adult before they learn their times tables. Marcus heard the voice on the other end suddenly get louder through the small phone speaker, too muffled for him to make out the words. But he saw Ava flinch instantly. "Sorry." Silence. "Sorry." Marcus closed his eyes for a second. Then he deliberately made a sound with his cleaning cart, just so Ava would know someone was coming. She spun around fast, almost in a panic. But when she saw it was Marcus, she calmed down in a way that somehow felt even sadder. She hung up the phone. "Morning." Marcus nodded. "Morning." He set the sandwich down on the library table, acting like it was nothing. Cafeteria had an extra. Ava looked at the sandwich, then at him. "Thank you." Marcus pretended to fiddle with the old radio near the door. The morning news was on, talking about the weather and the high school football game this weekend. Things that were so normal, it was heartbreaking. He thought about Ethan when he was little. 12 years old, sitting in the garage, watching fix the car late into the night. Marcus used to think he was a good father because he worked hard, paid the bills on time, model he didn't drink, he didn't hit anyone. It was only later that he understood there are ways to be absent even when you're standing in the same room. Ethan once told him, "You're here all the time, but somehow you're never really here." Marcus had gotten angry that day. He remembered it clearly. Remembered the way he'd slammed the wrench down on the table. Remembered Ethan's silence. Remembered the way his boy's eyes changed for the very first time. American men are raised with a strange kind of education. You're taught to endure, don't complain. Work hard, keep it all bottled up inside, and if you feel too much, just keep working until you don't have time to think anymore. A lot of people call that being strong. Marcus used to believe that, until he saw too many old men grow lonely, never understanding why their kids stopped calling. He watched Ava unwrap her sandwich so slowly, as if she were trying to make the moment last. She took 2 small bites, then stopped. "You don't like turkey?" Ava immediately shook her head. "No, I do." "Then how come you stopped?" She looked down at the sandwich. Maybe later. Marcus knew what that meant now. Saving it. Just in case there was no dinner tonight either. He turned away, looking through the library's glass doors. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, very slowly. Old snow covered the ball field behind the school. The streetlights were still on. "Dad works nights" was starting to sound more like a rehearsed answer than the whole truth. Marcus didn't think Daniel Brooks was a monster. He'd met real monsters in his life. Monsters usually don't feel shame. It was men like Daniel who were more dangerous, exhausted men, defeated men, men who were starting to drown but still had to pretend they were okay. Sometimes they pulled the whole house down with them without even realizing it. Marcus had seen it happen too many times back in Ohio after the factories closed. Men who lost their jobs. Then you lose your way. Then you lose the ability to talk about how you feel. And then the whole family starts living like they're tiptoeing around an invisible pit in the middle of the living room. Ava sat there, reading for almost another 20 minutes in silence. Marcus mopped the hallway just outside the library door, a small radio crackling softly. After a moment, he realized the thing that bothered him most wasn't that Ava came to school so early. It was that she acted like it was completely normal. Around 6:15, Marcus came back to change the trash bag near the library door. Ava was watching the snow fall outside. She didn't turn around. Marcus set the trash bag down. Then, for the first time, he asked the question that had been on his mind for days. "You like going home?" Ava didn't answer right away. She just kept looking out the glass door for a long, long time. So long that Marcus thought he wasn't going to get an answer. Then, finally, Ava said softly, "Sometimes." Marcus didn't say anything more after that. He just stood there, the trash bag in his hand, and felt a very old kind of sadness well up inside him. When he was younger, Marcus used to think children were simple creatures. If they were laughing, they were okay. If they were quiet, they were just tired. Adults like to believe that because it makes life a lot easier. But age had eventually taught him otherwise. Kids who live with chronic stress don't cry as much as people think. They learn to adapt. They learn to read footsteps. They learn to guess a mood from the sound of a closing door. They learn how to make themselves smaller just to keep the house a little quieter. The scariest thing isn't when a child is scared. The scariest thing is when they start to think that state of being is normal. Marcus had seen plenty of adults live their whole lives like that, never truly escaping the feeling that they had to step aside in their own homes. And sometimes he wondered if Ethan had ever felt that way when he was a boy. The snow started coming down hard after 4 p.m. It wasn't the pretty kind of snow you see in Christmas movies. This was the thick, gray, heavy kind that made the whole Ohio town look like it was coated in cold cement dust. Marcus was working the night shift that evening because another janitor had called out with the flu. He didn't like the night shift. The school always felt strange to him after the kids had all gone home. During the day, this place was filled with the sound of running sneakers, with laughter, with teachers' gentle reminders, and with childish arguments over things that would be forgotten in 10 minutes. But at night, Fairfield Ridge felt like an abandoned ship, long, quiet, and cold. Around 7:30, Marcus was guiding the floor buffer down the west hallway when he heard the wind slam against the glass doors at the end of the hall. The vending machine near the cafeteria hummed steadily in the darkness. The old radio was playing a traffic report about icy roads on the interstate. Outside, a snowplow scraped by in heavy, drawn-out bursts. Marcus rubbed his back, slowly straightening up. His back always ached more when the temperature dropped. He glanced at the wall clock. 8:37. That's when he realized something wasn't right. Ava's backpack was still sitting by the library. Marcus stood still for a moment. Then he started walking faster down the third-grade hallway. Most of the lights in that wing were already out. Only the emergency lights were on, casting a cold, faint blue light onto the floor. And there, at the end of the hallway, Ava was sitting alone on a bench against the wall. Still in her winter coat, her backpack clutched in her lap. She wasn't doing anything. Just sitting there, as if she'd been waiting for a very long time. Marcus stopped. "Ava?" She looked up immediately, not startled, just tired. The kind of tired you should never see on a child's face. "Hey," Marcus glanced at his watch again. "What are you still doing here?" Ava pulled her sleeves down over her hands. There was a short pause. Then she said, "Dad forgot today." No tears, no anger, no blame. Just a simple statement, like she was telling him it was snowing. And that, right there, hurt Marcus more than any tears ever could. He looked down the dark hallway behind her. "Did you call your dad?" Ava nodded. "He said he's coming." When? She gave a tiny shrug. Marcus let out a slow breath. He'd seen this kind of waiting before. And not just from kids. In bars. At the hospital. In his old garage. She waited the way someone does when they're used to being forgotten, still holding on to a little bit of hope because there's nothing else left to do. Marcus pulled a chair across from her and sat down. "Have you eaten anything?" Ava shook her head. "Not really." Marcus glanced down the hall toward the vending machine. "Come on." She shot to her feet, faster than she needed to. Like she was terrified of making a grown-up wait. The two of them walked down the empty hallway, their shoes echoing softly on the floor. Through the glass doors, snow was falling thick and fast under the streetlights. Marcus led Ava to the janitor's closet behind the cafeteria. It wasn't much of a room, just a small space with a shelf of cleaning supplies, an old radio, a microwave, a folding table, a single metal chair, and a reflective safety jacket hanging by the door. But it was warm. Instead of the harsh overhead fluorescence, Marcus switched on a small lamp on the table, casting a soft yellow light. He opened the microwave and heated up a container of tomato soup, a leftover from the cafeteria. The smell of the hot soup quickly filled the small space. Ava sat perfectly still in the chair. Her hands were placed on her knees. Marcus realized she always sat that way, as if she were afraid of taking up too much space. He set the soup down in front of her. Careful, it's hot. Thank you. Marcus opened a small cabinet and took out a few packets of crackers. The cafeteria had extra. Ava looked at him for a few seconds. She knew he was lying, but they both pretended not to notice. Marcus pulled an old blanket from the nearby nurse's office and handed it to the little girl. School nurse keeps extras. Ava took it, her hands so careful. Can I really use it? Marcus frowned. Kid, it's a blanket, not a Ferrari. For the first time that night, a tiny smile touched Ava's lips. It was quick, but it was a real smile. Marcus turned away, pretending to look for something on the shelf. For some reason, that moment made his throat feel a little tight. Outside, the sound of a snowplow dragged on down the street. The vending machine hummed steadily from the hallway. The school lights at night always had such a cold color. Marcus hated those lights. They made everything look lonelier than it really was. Ava ate her soup very slowly, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she was trying to make it last. Marcus noticed, and he pretended that he didn't. You like the school? Marcus gave a small smile. Funny. Most kids hate quiet. Ava pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Quiet is easier. Marcus didn't ask, easier than what? He was starting to understand that there are some questions you shouldn't push a kid to answer before they're ready. Around 8:56, Marcus stood by the door, watching the snow in the parking lot. His old Ford was almost completely covered in white. He wondered where Daniel Brooks was. What bothered Marcus the most was this. He didn't think the man was intentionally cruel. And sometimes, the ones who aren't trying to be are the most dangerous. A man who's sinking rarely realizes who he's pulling down with him. Marcus had been one of them. Not this bad, but bad enough that Ethan stopped calling. Enough for his ex-wife to look at him one day and say, "You don't know how to be in a room emotionally." Back then, the words hadn't made any sense to him. Not anymore. Behind him, Ava had leaned her head against the wall. Her eyelids were starting to get heavy. Marcus was just about to tell her she could get some sleep when Ava's phone vibrated. The sound was quiet, but Ava flinched so hard she almost dropped the soup bowl. The phone vibrated a second time before Ava dared to pick it up. Marcus saw that clear as day. She stared at the screen for a few seconds, as if bracing herself before she answered. Dad? Model Marcus turned away, pretending to fiddle with the radio to give Ava a little privacy. Daniel Brooks's voice came through the speakerphone, faint and tinny. The words were muffled, just the sound of a man talking fast and tired. Ava sat up a little straighter. It's okay. A pause. No, Mr. Hale stayed. Marcus paused when he heard his name. Ava just kept staring down at her shoes. We're at school. Then barely a whisper. Okay. She hung up. Is he on his way? Ava shook her head. He said the truck won't start. Marcus glanced at his watch. 9:13. Outside, the snow was falling harder now. Do you know your address? Ava nodded. Marcus was quiet for a moment. His head told him to call the police or social services. That was the protocol. But if life had taught Marcus anything, it was this. Protocol and what a child actually needs in the moment. They aren't always the same thing. All right, he said slowly. I'll take you home. The old Ford shuddered as Marcus drove through the snow-covered streets of Fairfield Ridge. Ava sat perfectly still in the passenger seat. Her hands were clutching her backpack. She always held that backpack like it contained her whole world. The radio was announcing school closures for the snowstorm on the late-night news. Marcus turned the volume down low. You been here long in Fairfield Ridge? Yeah, since first grade. Marcus nodded. Then the car fell quiet again. It wasn't uncomfortable silence, though. It was the quiet of two people who were used to keeping things to themselves. Daniel Brooks's house was at the end of a small street near the old factory district on the north side of town. Marcus knew the area. 10 years ago, this part of town was lit up all night. Workers getting off their shifts, trucks coming and going. The bars played their music loud. Then the factory closed. And it was like someone pulled the plug on the whole town. A lot of families left. The ones who stayed were usually the ones who couldn't afford to go anywhere else. Marcus killed the engine in front of an old, faded gray duplex. The porch light was off. A single downstairs window glowed faintly. Ava stared at the house for a few seconds, then said quietly, "He's probably asleep." Marcus turned to look at the little girl. "What were you going to do if I wasn't here tonight?" Ava shrugged. Wait. The answer was so simple it made Marcus's chest ache. He got out of the car. The snow was almost ankle deep. Marcus knocked twice. No answer. The third knock was harder. Finally, a sound from inside. Something falling. Then the lock turned. Daniel Brooks stood before him, framed by the dim yellow light of the dark house. Somewhere near 40, not old, but he looked like he'd already lived too long. Days of stubble on his face, a wrinkled t-shirt, red eyes. Not the red of an angry man, but of a man who just didn't sleep. Marcus had prepared himself to hate this man on sight, but the first thing he felt was exhaustion. Daniel looked at Ava first, then at Marcus. Ava. The little girl walked inside quickly. She didn't run to hug her father. She didn't cry. She just entered like an attendant trying not to cause any trouble. Daniel looked at Marcus. You from the school? Janitor. A short silence. Truck died, Daniel said. Marcus nodded. She was sitting at the school for almost 4 hours after everyone left. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, and for the first time, Marcus saw something that looked a lot like shame flash across the man's face. Yeah, no explanation, no excuses. Just a yes so quiet it almost disappeared. Marcus stood in the doorway for a few more seconds. The air in the house was a mix of an old heater, stale beer, damp laundry, and a room that had been closed up for too long. He saw unpaid bills on a table, a sink full of dishes, empty beer cans next to the sofa, cough syrup on the kitchen counter, the TV on, but muted. There were no signs of violence, nothing horrible in the way people imagine. Just the feeling of a home that had been exhausted for a long, long time. Marcus realized the most unsettling thing about neglect wasn't always malice. Sometimes it was just a slow collapse, until the person inside no longer had the strength to see anyone else. Daniel scratched the back of his neck. I appreciate you bringing her home. Marcus looked at Ava, who was taking off her shoes by the door in absolute silence. The girl was always trying to make as little noise as possible. Has she eaten? Daniel glanced toward the kitchen as if he genuinely couldn't remember. I think so. Marcus didn't answer. A heavy, uncomfortable silence stretched between the two men. Finally, Daniel spoke first. She talks about the library a lot. Marcus leaned slightly against the doorframe. She likes quiet places. Daniel let out a tiny laugh, a laugh with no joy in it at all. Yeah. Then he looked down at the floor. Marcus saw Daniel's hand was trembling slightly. Not much, but enough to notice. The factory? Marcus asked. Daniel looked up, a little surprised. Yeah, which one? Midwest Steel. Marcus nodded slowly. He knew that factory, knew the day it closed down. The whole town did. Over 800 people lost their jobs in a single winter. A lot of folks never really got back on their feet after that. Daniel leaned against the wall. My wife got sick the same year. Marcus stayed quiet. Cancer. He said the word like he was reading the weather report. Flat, no emotion. That's usually a sign someone's told themselves the story too many times in their own head. After she died, Daniel trailed off. Then he shook his head, as if he was tired of explaining himself. Marcus looked at the man in front of him. He didn't see a monster. He saw a man who was drowning. And the thing that bothered Marcus the most was, a part of him understood just how terrifying that felt. Daniel looked over at Ava, standing quietly by the hallway. For a long time. Then he said something that would stick with Marcus for years. So quiet, almost to himself. I don't think she should see me like this anymore. After that snowy night, things didn't change right away. Daniel Brooks didn't suddenly become a perfect father, and Ava didn't turn into some happy kid from a morning cereal commercial. Real life doesn't work like that. But something had begun to shift, very slowly. Marcus noticed Ava started coming to school even earlier than before. Some mornings, at 10 to 5, she'd already be sitting in the library, a book open on her lap, her eyes still heavy with sleep. Marcus didn't ask about that night, and Ava never brought it up. The two of them seemed to have a silent agreement, not making things any bigger than they needed to be to keep going. On Monday morning, Marcus brought 2 breakfast sandwiches from the diner near the school. He set one on the library table. Don't ask. I got the wrong order. Ava looked at the sandwich, then back at him. You always get the wrong thing when it's something I like. Marcus pulled up a chair and sat down. It's a serious condition. She let out a small laugh. Marcus started to slow down in the mornings. Before, he used to power walk through the halls, always working, as if he was trying to finish the day before it even started. Now he'd linger in the library for a few minutes. Sometimes he'd fix a bookshelf. Other times he'd change the battery in the wall clock. And sometimes he'd just listen to Ava read. She was a very serious reader. The way a kid reads when they're trying to live inside the story, because the real world isn't a comfortable enough place to be. One morning while Ava was reading a book about horses, Marcus noticed the strap on her backpack was about to snap. He picked up the backpack. "This thing's about done for." Ava stood up immediately. "It's okay. No, kid. This thing's ready for retirement." Marcus took the backpack down to the janitor's closet. Ava sat beside him, watching as he stitched the strap back on with some heavy-duty thread that didn't quite match. She watched him intently. "You know how to sew?" "No." "Then how are you doing it?" Marcus pulled the final knot tight. "Most things are fixable if you sit with them long enough." Ava was quiet for a long time, thinking about that. Marcus realized he was saying the kind of thing Ethan had needed to hear when he was a kid. Not the big lessons, just the small things. Things like that not everything that's broken needs to be thrown away, that some things just need time, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is just stay long enough. But when Ethan was little, Marcus had always been too busy, or too tired, or too quiet. Another morning, a light in the corner of the library was flickering on and off. Marcus set up a small stepladder beneath it. Ava stood and watched. "Want to learn?" "Learn what?" "How to change a light bulb without turning yourself into a barbecue." This time, Ava let out a real laugh. Marcus handed her the new bulb. "First rule, always turn the power off first." Most people skip that because they think bad things only happen to other people. Ava nodded, dead serious, as if she were learning a survival skill. Marcus stood below, holding the ladder while Ava changed the bulb. She worked very slowly, very carefully. When the light flickered on again, Ava looked down at Marcus with a tiny hint of pride. "I fixed it." "Yeah," Marcus said. "You did." The moment reminded him of Ethan, 10 years old, standing in the garage after fixing the spark plug on his bike for the first time. Marcus tried to remember what he'd said back then. Actually, he couldn't remember. And that was the problem. There are so many moments in life that pass you by, moments you think you'll always have time to go back to, until you don't. Emily Carter's attitude toward Marcus slowly started to change. One morning, she found Ava eating a breakfast sandwich in the library. Marcus immediately braced himself for another uncomfortable conversation, but Emily just leaned against the door for a few seconds, then said, "She smiles more now." Marcus glanced over at Ava, who was reading a book at a corner table. "Maybe she's sleeping better." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I used to think you were a little over-involved." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Used to?" Emily gave a small smile. "Now I think you're just the only person who was willing to sit still long enough to notice something was wrong." Marcus didn't know what to say, so he pretended to adjust his radio. An old country song crackled to life through the library. Ava looked up from her book. "You always listen to sad music. That's because happy music lies too much." Ava thought about it for a second, then nodded as if she truly understood. Marcus wasn't sure if that made him feel better or worse. The following weeks passed by in a series of small things. Breakfast sandwiches, hot chocolate, library books, light bulbs, short conversations. There was no big cinematic moment, just the act of showing up over and over again. And sometimes, for a kid, that's the rarest thing of all. One Friday morning, the snow was mostly melted. The first sun in days streamed through the library windows. Marcus was fixing a wheel on his cleaning cart while Ava sat nearby, reading a book on the floor. She was quiet for a long time. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Do grown-ups ever get less lonely?" Emily Carter filed the report on a Wednesday morning. Marcus knew it before she even told him. He saw it in the way she looked when she came out of the school counselor's office. That tight-lipped silence of someone who just did the right thing, but doesn't feel any better for it. Emily stood by the vending machine for a few seconds before speaking. "I filed it." Marcus nodded. No one needed to explain what it was. The official report, concerned documentation, social services. Words that sound so cold and bureaucratic, until you see a little girl sleeping in the library before the sun is even up. Emily crossed her arms, looking down at the floor. "I should have done it sooner." Marcus leaned his shoulder against the wall. "People hesitate?" "Yeah." Emily gave a tiny, humorless smile. "I kept thinking maybe I was overreacting." Marcus understood that feeling. Modern life makes people afraid to get involved. Everyone worries they're misreading the situation, worried about overstepping, worried about turning a sad situation into something worse. For years, Marcus had thought that indifference usually came from cruelty. Now, he understood most of it came from fear and exhaustion. People see a problem. And then they tell themselves, I'm sure someone will take care of it. But sometimes there is no one else. That afternoon, the social worker came to the school. Her name was Linda Perez, around 50 years old, a soft voice but a sharp gaze, the kind of person who'd seen too many broken families to be fooled by perfect answers. Marcus wasn't part of the conversation. He just mopped the hallway just outside the library while Ava sat in the counselor's office with Linda and Emily. About 40 minutes later, Daniel Brooks showed up. Marcus saw him walk into the school through the front glass doors. His old jacket wasn't zipped up all the way. His hair was still wet, like he'd just splashed water on his head instead of really taking a shower. The man didn't look angry, just panicked. Marcus had seen that look before, at the garage after a big round of layoffs, the look of a man who just had the rug pulled out from under him. Daniel spoke with Linda for almost an hour. There was no shouting, no angry dad scene. Somehow, that almost made it sadder. After Linda left, Daniel just sat there for a long time, on a bench in the hallway near the library. His hands were clasped together, head bowed. Marcus was changing a trash bag nearby when Daniel was the first to speak. She thinks I'm hurting her. Marcus didn't answer right away. Daniel let out a small, quiet laugh. Maybe I am. The old heater hummed softly inside the walls. Outside in the schoolyard, old snow was melting into a dirty gray slush. Daniel was quiet for another moment, and then he spoke again. Do you know the weird thing, Marcus? Just looked at him. I never thought I was the kind of man people should worry about. That line landed heavy in Marcus's chest. Because most men who end up hurting their families once thought the exact same thing. Daniel looked down at his own hands. I kept thinking if I survived the week, things would get better. Marcus didn't interrupt. Then it became surviving the month. Daniel gave a crooked, humorless smile. Then the year. He scrubbed at his face with both hands. Factory closed. Lisa got sick. Bills stacked up. I stopped sleeping right. Started drinking more than I should. Silence. Then one day your kid starts looking scared of you, and somehow even that isn't enough to wake you up immediately. Marcus looked at the man in front of him. He wasn't a monster. Not a simple bad guy. Just a man who'd been drowning for so long, he'd started to pull someone else under without even realizing it. That didn't forgive him, but it made everything hurt more. Daniel looked up, really looking at Marcus for the first time. She talks about you a lot. Marcus frowned. Mostly the library stuff. A beat of silence. Thank you for being kind to her. Marcus looked through the glass of the library door. Ava was sitting there, reading, but her eyelids were starting to get heavy. Kids remember who makes them feel safe, Marcus said softly. Daniel turned his face away, quickly. Marcus thought the man might be trying not to cry. That night, Marcus got back to his apartment later than usual. He heated up leftover meatloaf in the microwave and ate it standing at the kitchen counter. The TV was on, but he wasn't watching it. His phone lay just a few inches from his hand for almost an hour. Ethan's name was still in his contacts. Marcus had never deleted it. He just never called. Some distances go on for so long, you start to treat them like furniture. Something that's always been there, so you just stop trying to move it. Finally, Marcus picked up the phone. His finger hovered over Ethan's name for a long time. Then he pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Marcus was just about to hang up. Then someone on the other end picked up. Hello? Ethan's voice was older than Marcus remembered it. The thought was strangely heartbreaking. Hey, a few seconds of silence. Dad? Yeah, more silence. No background music, nothing cinematic. Just 2 men who didn't know where to begin after almost 8 years. How are you? Marcus asked. Fine, good. The silence stretched on. Marcus could almost hear Ethan deciding whether or not he should stay on the line. Everything okay? Ethan finally asked. Marcus looked out his apartment window. The snow outside had almost melted away. People were shoveling the last of the ice from the sidewalks. He thought about Ava, asleep in the library. He thought about Daniel Brooks. He thought about all the men who just keep toughing it out until everything around them starts to break. Yeah, Marcus said slowly. I think so. There was another silence. Then Ethan asked a question that took Marcus a long time to answer. Why now? Marcus looked down at the old stainless steel coffee pot on the table. Then he remembered Ava, dozing off by the library window that morning, a book still open in her hands. He remembered her asking, do grown-ups ever get less lonely? Marcus closed his eyes for a second. Then, very softly, he said, because I think I finally understood something. Winter began to leave Fairfield Ridge very slowly. The snow melted into dirty gray patches of ice that shrank at the edge of the sidewalks. The trees were still bare, but the air had lost the kind of chill that made you hunch your shoulders the moment you stepped outside. Marcus always liked this time between seasons. Things weren't beautiful yet, but at least you started to believe that winter would eventually end. Ava was changing in that same small way. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Just little things Marcus started to notice, one by one. She wasn't nodding off in the library every morning anymore. She still got there early, but her eyes were less red. Some days she even said hello to him first. "Morning, Mr. Hale." Such a simple thing. But Marcus knew that some kids only start saying hello to people when they finally feel safe enough to think about tomorrow. Emily Carter noticed it even before Marcus did. One morning, she was standing by the library door, watching Ava laugh with a few other students, and then she turned to Marcus. She laughs now. Marcus was changing the batteries in the projector remote. Kids laugh. Emily shook her head. No, not like before. Marcus watched Ava for a few more seconds. It really was different. It wasn't a loud, bubbly kind of happy. It was just that her body was starting to relax. She didn't flinch anymore whenever a door slammed shut. She no longer looked down the hallway like she was waiting for something bad to happen. Sometimes, real healing is just your nervous system finally starting to believe that today, nobody is going to yell. Daniel Brooks was starting to change too. Very slowly. It was awkward and absolutely nothing like in the movies where the alcoholic dad suddenly cries and hugs his kid, and then everything is fine again. Real life doesn't work that way. Marcus knew Daniel was going to A meetings because he'd once seen the man sit in his car in the school parking lot for almost 40 minutes after pickup time, just trying to work up the nerve to go inside. Another time, Daniel came in for a meeting with the school counselor. His shirt was ironed, his hair was cut shorter, but his hand still had a slight tremor as he held the paper coffee cup. The man still looked tired. Only now he looked like someone who was trying to get back on his feet, instead of just staying down at the bottom. Marcus didn't force himself to like Daniel right away. Sometimes he was still angry on Ava's behalf. It still bothered him to remember her sitting all alone in that dark hallway at almost 9 o'clock at night. But Marcus saw something else too. Shame. Daniel carried the shame of a man who had finally looked at the wreckage around him and realized he was the one who had caused most of it. One Friday afternoon, Marcus happened to see Daniel waiting for Ava outside the school. No phone, no cigarette, just standing there in the cold wind, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. When Ava came out the door, Daniel awkwardly held one of the cups out to her as if he was afraid of doing the wrong thing. Ava took it. Father and daughter stood beside each other for a few seconds, neither knowing what to say. Then they walked to the car together. Marcus watched them through the hallway window for a long, long time. Healing is rarely pretty. Most of the time, it's just clumsy people trying again. Another morning, Ava walked into the library with a sun-shaped sticker on her shirt. Emily, walking in behind her, explained she joined reading club. Marcus raised an eyebrow at Ava. Big social life now, huh? She blushed a little. The reading club met every Wednesday after school. Marcus realized that Ava wasn't staying late at school anymore because she was afraid to go home. It was because, for the first time, she actually wanted to be somewhere. Those are 2 very different things. Something else had changed, too. Ava wasn't hiding food anymore. He realized it when he left 2 granola bars on a library table and forgot about them until noon. Before, one of them would have been gone for sure, tucked away in a coat pocket. This time, they were both still right where he left them. When a body finally stops believing it's going to be starved, it can slowly stop preparing for the next disaster. Kids notice that kind of thing long before adults do. One day, Marcus was eating his lunch alone behind the cafeteria, same as always when Ava walked in. He usually ate alone. Turkey sandwich, an apple, cold coffee, an old radio next to his toolbox, a small, quiet life. Ava stood by the door for a few seconds. "Forget your book?" She shook her head. Then, very naturally, Ava pulled up a chair and sat down next to him, without asking, without permission. Just sat down like it was the most normal thing in the world. Marcus looked at her. "You know, hanging around old janitors ruins your reputation, right?" Ava opened her milk carton. "I think my reputation will survive." Marcus chuckled softly. The 2 of them ate lunch in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't awkward, just quiet. Marcus realized the strangest thing about kids was they always notice who's sitting alone. Adults usually pretend not to see each other's loneliness. Kids don't. Ava took a bite of her sandwich and then asked unexpectedly, "Did your son like books too?" Marcus hesitated for a moment. "Sometimes. What kinds?" Marcus thought for a few seconds. "Space stuff, mostly. Anything with rockets." Ava nodded very seriously, as if she were committing it to memory. Marcus looked out at the nearly empty cafeteria. Early spring sunlight streamed through the glass, making the tiny dust motes in the air visible. And, for the first time in so many years, he realized his lunch break no longer felt like the longest part of the day. Sometimes healing isn't a loud noise. Sometimes it's just an empty chair next to you. That someone finally sits in. Marcus Hale retired at the end of May. Fairfield Ridge Elementary held a small farewell for him in the cafeteria on the last Friday afternoon before summer break. There was a sheet cake from the grocery store on the main road. There was coffee that was way too weak. A few teachers gave short speeches. Emily Carter started crying halfway through hers, then laughed at herself for it. The kids had made a banner that read, "Thank you, Memmer Hall." A few of the letters were slanted. A few were misspelled. To Marcus, it was more beautiful than any plaque he'd ever been given. He hated goodbyes like this. Not because they were annoying. It was just, he never knew what to do when people were openly kind to him. Marcus stood by the pale blue counter in the cafeteria, holding up a paper coffee cup, listening to the principal tell a story about the time he'd fixed the heating system in the middle of a winter night so the school wouldn't have to close. People laughed. Marcus managed a small smile. But mostly he just looked around the room. At the hallways he'd mopped 1,000 times, the tiny little desks, the bulletin boards full of colored paper. All these ordinary things that had somehow become almost his entire life. He'd thought this job would just be temporary, and then temporary turned into nearly 2 decades. Ava was sitting with Emily near the back of the room. She was taller now. Her hair was longer. She flinched less whenever there was a loud noise. Marcus noticed that, and he felt a strange kind of relief. Like a child's body had finally understood it didn't need to be ready for danger all the time anymore. Daniel had come too, clean shirt, still a little awkward making small talk with the other parents, but sober, present. That mattered more than most people knew. After the party, the school slowly emptied out. The teachers left first. The kids vanished from the hallways like a receding tide. The last of the laughter finally faded from the building. Marcus went back to the janitor's closet to pack up the last of his personal things. There wasn't much: an old radio, a scratched-up stainless steel thermos, 2 hoodies, and a picture of Ethan at 13, standing next to the first bike he ever fixed up himself. Marcus opened the old metal locker against the wall. The door let out its familiar groan, and that's when he saw the folded piece of paper sitting just inside. Marcus frowned slightly. He unfolded it very slowly. It was a drawing made with colored pencils, childlike, imperfect, but so incredibly careful. In the drawing, Marcus was holding a mop, standing in front of Fairfield Ridge Elementary. Next to him was a little girl with a backpack almost half her size. Above them, a yellow sun was drawn a little crooked, and at the bottom of the paper, in handwriting that wasn't quite straight yet, Ava had written, "You noticed me." Marcus stood there for a long time. Out in the hallway, the sound of someone dragging a chair echoed faintly. The old heater hummed in the wall just like every other day. The late afternoon sun of early summer slanted through the high, small window, casting a thin layer of light on the tile floor. Marcus sat down on the metal chair in the janitor's closet. Very slowly. The drawing was still in his hand. "You noticed me." Marcus read that line over and over again in his head, and then he realized what made it hurt so much. For most of his life, Marcus had thought a man's worth was measured by making money, fixing whatever was broken, toughing it out, never complaining, and just keep working no matter how tired you were. No one ever told him that sometimes the thing that changes someone's life is much simpler. Just seeing them, really seeing them, long enough so they don't feel invisible anymore. Marcus thought about Ethan. He thought about all those years he was physically present, but his mind was always somewhere else. The garage, the bills, the stress, the exhaustion. He used to believe that as long as he didn't walk out, that was enough to be a good father. Now, he wasn't so sure. Marcus sat in the empty janitor's closet for almost 10 minutes. Not crying, not saying a word, just sitting there with the drawing in his hand, feeling something inside him finally settle after so many years. Then his phone vibrated. Marcus almost jumped. The screen lit up the quiet room, a text message from Ethan. Marcus stared at the name for a long time before he opened it. "Hey Dad, you free for dinner Sunday?" Marcus read the text twice, then a third time. Nothing dramatic, no cinematic reconciliation, no imaginary music swelled in the background. Just a short message from the son he hadn't truly spoken to in almost 8 years. Marcus looked around the janitor's closet one last time, the mop, leaning against the wall, the old radio, the open locker, the last light of day. And for the first time in so many years, Marcus realized something strange. He no longer felt like this school was the only place he belonged. People tend to think that the thing that changes a child's life has to be something big, a dramatic rescue, a heroic moment, an event that changes everything overnight. But the longer Marcus lived, the more he understood that most people aren't saved by big things like that. Most of us are saved by the small things. Someone remembering that you always show up earlier than everyone else. Someone realizing you're hiding food instead of just thinking you're a picky eater. Someone willing to sit next to you long enough to understand that your silence isn't always a personality trait. It's a survival mechanism. Ava didn't need a hero. She needed a grown-up who would finally just look closely. Someone who wouldn't turn away so quickly just because the truth made them uncomfortable. Because some kids grow up in houses that don't lack for walls or a roof, but lack so much safety that they learn to make themselves as small as possible. Quieter, less demanding, less emotional, less there. And the most heartbreaking part is, many of the adults around them don't even notice it's happening. Marcus wasn't perfect either. It took him almost his entire life to understand that a father doesn't just need to be in the house. He needs to be truly present in the emotional lives of the people he loves. Daniel Brooks didn't become a different person in just a few weeks either. Real healing isn't pretty like it is in the movies. It's slow, it's awkward. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and sometimes it's just a father finally agreeing to go to therapy. A little girl stops hiding half a sandwich in her pocket. A phone call that should have been made 8 years ago. But maybe that's what makes this story feel so real. Because in the end, what changed Ava wasn't some big rescue. It was someone showing up every single morning, right on time. A tired old man with an aching back and a beat-up radio. Someone who was willing to look twice when most people just walked on by. Some children stop asking for help long before adults noticed they needed it. Ava almost did. Thankfully, one tired old janitor looked twice.